I'm Julie Zenner along with Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
Well, a sad week for Duluth and St. Louis County with the passing of Commissioner Steve O'Neill. Some of those who knew Steve best will remember him tonight for his passion and his dedication. 2
small weekly newspapers on the Iron Range have closed their doors, victims of a difficult economy. We'll talk about the value of hometown newspapers.
And we'll have the week's business news and a news file story from 25 years ago featuring Steve O'Neill.
It's all up next on Almanac North. And welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. And Dennis, we marked the passing of a very influential yet humble man this week on the show.
If you knew Steve at all, you discovered early on no false pretenses with him. He was just a decent, wonderful human being.
That's right, and that's Steve O'Neill, of course. He accomplished so much good in the time that he was with us.
He sure did, Julie. St. Louis County Board member Steve O'Neill, a tireless advocate for the less fortunate in society, died on Tuesday, just one day after his 63rd birthday. O'Neill passed away from a rare form of thyroid cancer after apparently winning a battle with prostate cancer last winter. Now, remarkably, O'Neill did his best to keep up with his county board duties even while undergoing treatment. During a surprise appearance at last week's county board meeting, his fellow commissioners paid tribute.
But to see you here and doing the people's work which you were elected to do is simply amazing. And for me to call you a friend is really an understatement. You are a man of conviction, of courage, dedication, and I am simply proud to be on this board with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Sutter. I don't want this to be a eulogy. I want this to be that encouragement for you to continue the fight. And I know that you have the prayers of not everyone, not only everyone on this board, but literally, as I look at your Caring Bridge and all those other things that are out there, you have thousands of people that love you and want to see that miracle happen where you are totally cured of your cancer. And that's what I'm hoping the good Lord does for you. Thank you very much. It's been a great honor to serve on the board. And I hope I will continue to serve for some time. Thank you.
And he did get a standing ovation. Joining us now are some friends and colleagues who knew Steve well. Jim Mischler-Philbin is with One Roof Community Housing in Duluth. Donna Howard is a longtime member of Duluth's Loaves and Fishes community. And Melissa Droulliard, once homeless, is a former guest of Loaves and Fishes. Thank you all for being here tonight. And Jim, it's a tough week for folks who knew Steve, but certainly when you look back, there is a lot to celebrate about his life.
There is. It's it's hard to know even where to begin, and maybe I begin at the end. In a way, it was, I think, providential that the gospel reading the last Sunday was the Good Samaritan, and just days before his birthday and his death, and that so much represented who Steve was, that he was that person who stopped and attended to other people. There were those of us who would cross the road to avoid the homeless person, or who would turn the other way and not want to see poverty or people's struggles. And Steve greeted people, treated them all with dignity, and invited others to do that.
And he brought this goodness to the table through eyes of faith, did he not?
Absolutely. He was a very committed Christian. He was influenced in many ways. St. Francis was one of his idols and heroes, and also the Benedictine tradition. You know, he really treated that the way of St. Benedict of treating everyone as Christ, and that's how he received people. And and it affected others. I think other people responded to that and said, "Yeah, I need to be like that too." So.
Donna, you've known Steve for many years. Share a memory or a story that maybe really gets to the essence of who Steve was and what made him tick.
Oh, Julie, sorry, it's really difficult to think of an anecdote. And I've been thinking about that this week, trying to bring specifics back into my mind of time and place and conversation and so forth. It was the way he modeled it himself. Steve never ever would have talked to any of us about, here's how I think you should do things, here's how I think should be done. Steve just did them based on his faith and his utter commitment to giving dignity to each other human being. And so we were able to watch Steve and Angie do that in Loaves and Fishes community, and so many of us have been able to just walk in those footsteps.
Talk about Loaves and Fishes, because there may be people watching who aren't familiar with it, and yet that community that you created in opening your homes for the homeless people of our community really gets to the heart of what Steve O'Neill was all about.
I think it does too, Julie. I think it was the first thing Steve and Angie did here in town. They came from a community for homeless people in Washington, D.C., and when they came here, they started the Dorothy Day House on Jefferson Street and made it a house where homeless people could come and stay with them, and every person was treated as the Christ or as the angel unaware. And it was the first thing they did here, and I think as Steve's sphere of influence grew, being on the county commission is a much more visible, bigger, then you are visible by the whole county, and you influence so many people. But yes, I think the personalism and the faith base of greeting a person at your door and welcoming them as a member of your family is quintessential Steve and Angie. I want to keep saying Angie because Steve didn't found the community, they did. And I have never seen anybody go from that grassroots, humble personalism to this larger sphere of influence without ever changing the value or the heart or the attitude that was behind it.
Melissa, you were once homeless, and Steve was an undying advocate for the homeless. What did you learn from him?
Love. They graciously accepted me for who I am, and they took me and my son in. I hate to say this, but those were some of my best years.
Really?
Is knowing this group of people, and I actually still hang with some of them, but I mean, I've always tried to pass on what they taught me, and it's to give and to have an open heart and an open mind.
You learned that from he and Angie.
Yeah, because that's love. I mean, there's just such beautiful love. They always say there's an angel among us, and I really think that Steve was one of them. He was a wonderful person.
Jim, could you speak to some of the specific ways in which you see the community being a better place because we knew Steve O'Neill and he knew us as a community?
Yeah, there's so many ways. I mean, there's so many different organizations that he helped to create, one of which I worked for, the One River Community Housing, which was Northern Communities Land Trust and Neighborhood Housing Services, two organizations that he helped to create, Center City Housing, and many, many years working for CHUM. And in each of those ways, he, as Donna was saying, he was able to take a big picture view of poverty and issues that need to be addressed strategically and with long-term vision, but never neglecting the individual person in need right now. So he had a unique ability to be present in the moment, but also to be organizing for the future.
Jim, I always knew Steve to be soft-spoken. He was never a browbeater. Was that his success? In that he walked quietly, but he carried a big stick.
Well, walked the walk, as they say. I mean, that he was the opposite of a dour person. So you would think somebody who was immersed in these difficult issues and challenging encounters would be a very heavy person. But Steve was just the opposite. He was joyful, loved to prank, many of his friends will say, of course, and he just had this incredible light spirit about him that attracted people to the work. They said, they could see this work looks fun. This work looks enlivening. This, this relationship that's building with the people that we're working with. I want to be a part of that. So he had a way of making things seem possible for all of us to be able to do.
That doesn't mean he was afraid of conflict. He wasn't, and he would disagree with you and say the hardest truth to you that was in him, but always had a pleasant face when he did it. And it never lacked kindness, but he was honest.
And looking at how polarized our political system is today, his willingness to sit down and listen and have a dialogue
With anyone.
Do you think that he's really representative of what's needed in politics? And were you surprised when he decided to run for office?
I was. It was a little bit of a controversy on Jefferson Street where Loaves and Fishes is. There were questions about, is it best to work inside the system or best to work outside the system where you can agitate when it needs to be questioned. But I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was absolutely wonderful, just knowing how he would be able to work with everyone and how he would discover new resources and new ways to serve the people who need serving most.
Melissa, Steve has been called a mentor. How did he do that? Did he mentor you in your life?
I actually got to spend some time with him on an afternoon. When I went to Loaves and Fishes, I went with a broken leg and a 3-year-old son. And so I really couldn't get up and run. So I guess I had to sit and talk. But I got to talk to Steve about where I was at and what I was going through.
Was he a good listener?
Very. And he had just a list of where to go and how to do it and who to see and who to talk to. And it was, and that's what helped me, was to get all my ducks in a row so I could get back on my feet again and get going again. And that's the help that Loaves and Fishes brought me, was, to do that.
In reading the obituary, one of the phrases that stuck out to me was that, with all of these wonderful things that people were saying about him, he was also kind of a witty prankster. And I'm just wondering if those of you who knew him best have any examples of that, how he could make people laugh.
For one thing, his taste in humor was lowbrow. You would find humor in the most absurd April Fool's Day pranks. Can you think of any?
Yes, April Fool's was his first. There would often be lawn signs that might appear in someone's lawn of a candidate they weren't supporting, those types of things, or things that would show up in your food unexpectedly on April 1st. So you had to be careful about that.
How do you think that the memory of Steve and the work that he did will carry forward? I imagine you've had a lot of conversations with people who are working in the homelessness area right now. How is his influence going to continue and live on?
Well, we were just talking about that we all admired Steve for his work and more importantly appreciated his friendship, and we know that we have to do the work ourselves as well. Like we are, he's given us a great model, but we all have different and unique gifts, and we need to step up and continue. He really is a great organizer in that he empowered people to do the work. Wasn't Steve has to do everything. It was, lifting people up so that they could do it themselves. And I think that's the legacy that he's left is people are able to do that and want to do that now.
We should mention funeral services are 1 o'clock Sunday at the deck. Okay, thank you. Jim, Donna, Melissa, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
Many Duluth citizens call the streets their home. Too many, says the Low-Income Housing Consortium, who held a press conference today in front of the vacant Lincoln Hotel. By the turn of the century, more than 19 million will be homeless.
Right now in the United States, we have somewhere between 2 and 3 million homeless people in this country, people who do not have houses, who have no place to live, and we have no housing for them. Faced with another 19 million, we're talking about a staggering problem that needs to be addressed right now.
The Affordable Housing Act is awaiting congressional action. If passed, $15 billion will be allocated each year to expanding the supply of low-cost housing in northeast Minnesota as well as the rest of the U.S. Many supporting the project help because they feel being homeless is a little too close to home.
I had to live in that situation with my little girl for almost 2 years. And now that I've been able to establish myself in the community, I've been able to help others in housing situations.
The $15 billion Affordable Housing Act was introduced to the House last week. About 150 letters like this one will be sent to Durnberger, Boschwitz, and Oberstar, representing the way more than 1,000 people feel about Duluth's homeless. Colleen Burns, KDLH TV.
Earlier this month, 2 Iron Range weekly newspapers published their final editions. The Eveleth, St. and Gilbert Herald were shuttered, ending over a century of newspaper history in the 2 communities. They are the latest casualties in a long list of weekly newspapers that have gone out of business. And it has had us thinking about the importance of the local weeklies and what they mean to small-town America. Well, joining us to talk about that is Jake Benson, longtime owner of the Proctor Journal, who recently purchased the Hermantown Star. And Jake, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It seems that these are certainly some challenging times for newspapers in general, but particularly for small-town newspapers.
In one way, it is, and it started with the internet and newspapers not knowing how to handle it. We got on the internet back in 1994 when there was only 13,000 websites in the entire world.
Really?
We were only the second media, radio, TV, newspapers to have a web presence, and we realized the model that was out there, giving away your news for free, just wouldn't work. And then the economy got worse, but I'm proud to say that, at least in Minnesota, the newspaper industry, especially the weeklies, are thriving. There's more people reading newspaper content now than ever. And for the sad news, and it's almost like a death in the family to hear about Eveleth and Gilbert, that there are at least 2 or 3 new newspapers every year that are being created.
Sure.
It's interesting to me that that you say that the weeklies are particularly well received because people are able to get so much information round the clock, 24 hours a day. They can find out what folks in their community are doing by getting on Facebook. Why is it, though, that the weeklies continue to be popular with people?
We give an unbiased view. We get the news that I think people want to read. We have opinion if we do it right. You know, we have that active editorial page. And for us in the newspaper business, you know, we like to think that newspapers are the heart and the soul of a community. We set the standards as well as create that wonderful discourse any vibrant community needs.
Jake, do you think today's young people are paying attention to the news? Or are we losing a generation of folks here?
I think in many publications, they're trying to cope with bringing younger readers in, and there are a number of ways you could do it. When I was first started in the newspaper business, my dad advised me to always put in a dollop of sex to get people to read it.
Just a dollop.
Just a dollop. So I think newspapers today are embracing all forms of media, and they're doing wonderful jobs. I mean, in some instances, I like to look at St. Cloud as, for instance, they have an active online web presence. They do streaming video. They have a radio station out of there. And when the Supreme Court first allowed cameras in the courts to view the Coleman-Franken recount, it wasn't television, it was newspapers.
So newspapers are changing. It doesn't mean they are not as good as they once were. They are different from what they once were.
That's correct. And when you bring in the social media, the web presence, the print, there's more people reading newspapers today than ever. And Minnesota is at the forefront of newspapers in the United States. We have, as a for instance, the immediate past president of the National Newspaper Association, Reed Anfinson from Benson, Minnesota, but I just like to throw that in.
And you were involved at the statewide level too.
Yes, I'm a past president of the
Yes, you
Minnesota
are.
Newspaper Association, but Reed, being the immediate past president, is one of only 6 past presidents that have served at that level. Julie Bergman from Baudette, she is going to receive this November at the National Newspaper Association the highest award a female publisher could get. So in Minnesota, we're doing it right. We're getting people reading the newspapers, the editors, the publishers are involved in their community, and that creates readership and people who care about their community newspaper.
I've always been saddened by the death of a newspaper or the death of a radio or television station, because that's really particularly in small town America, that is the voice of that community, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. And people need that voice. They need a place to go to find out what's going on. They need an outlet where they could express their opinions. And without that, you lose something. You lose an important piece of your community, like losing a grocery store or a bank or a clothing store.
Do you also in some ways perhaps even lose history for future generations? Because I know having worked here on local documentaries, we often turn to the old newspapers to get those details from 100 years ago. But if the newspapers aren't in these small communities, is anybody going to be saving those stories?
My first thought when I heard about Eveleth and Gilbert was, what's going to happen to those archives? All that history. Hopefully not gone forever, but the Minnesota Historical Society has this wonderful program to archive newspaper stories. And I'm proud to say that the Proctor Journal is one of the 5 newspapers in the state that's working with the Historical Society to archive that data. But once it's lost, it's gone forever. And I do have to give Minnesota credit. Back in the territorial days, when Minnesota was just first starting out, one of the first laws they created was to archive the history of the territory, and they required every newspaper to send their edition to a central repository.
Jake, we are a mobile society, and it seems to me that when people leave a community, oftentimes they still subscribe to their local newspaper to keep tabs on what's happening back at home. Do you find that true?
Oh, yes. We, since going online, and we put up a paywall just because you just can't give away your content. Right. And it's surprising how every week we have new people signing up because they don't want to wait 2-3 days a week for that newspaper to be mailed to them. They want it, but they want to know what's going on and they want to know now.
Yeah.
And through the web and through social media, we're able to do that.
Yeah.
So would you say the future of newspapers is still strong?
I think the future of newspapers, especially the print edition, is very strong. People still like the feel of newspapers.
That's me.
And they still like to get that ink on their fingers.
Yep, that's me.
All right, Jake Benson,
Thank you,
you
Jake.
so
Thank
much
you.
for coming in. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Time now for the week's economic news from the folks at Business North. Signs of economic strength and weakness were both evident this week in the regional economy. Strength was shown in the banking sector, which nearly hit bottom during the nationwide recession. In financial reports, Wells Fargo reported a record first half, and U.S. Bancorp reported a record second quarter. Weakness was evident, though, in natural resources, where Steel Dynamics, owner of Mesabi Nugget, reported its quarterly net income had declined 34%. Those results mirror reduced profits experienced earlier this year by other Iron Range mining companies.
Duluth will soon be part of a nationwide network that serves the growing number of truck fleets that have converted to compressed natural gas, or CNG. Proponents say natural gas is more economical and produces less pollution than gasoline or diesel fuel. Trillium CNG is expanding its fueling network into Minnesota and Wisconsin, including Duluth, the Twin Cities, and Eau Claire. The site locations are based on customers' demands that CNG stations be built near their key shipping lanes.
Well, the 6th annual Wisconsin Science and Technology Symposium will be held in northwestern Wisconsin for the first time. On Monday and Tuesday, the statewide event will convene at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. Researchers will update the scientific and technology community on the latest developments. Also participating will be businesses doing research in biofuels, medicine, and medical devices to improve or commercialize innovative new products and processes. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Well, if you have a comment, now is the time to call. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. If you want the latest programming updates, visit the WDSE website, where you will also find the latest news and information about the station. Well, Denny, we're right in the heart of summer, the kind of weather that you love.
Oh, I do. I like winter, but I love summer too. I like heat.
And as you so graciously reminded me, 5 more months until Christmas?
That's it. I didn't get this tan by going to Iceland.
For Denny and all of us at Almanac North, I'm Julie Zenner. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it.